Mondays. Am I right?
Totally right.
Start of the work week. You gotta get your engines revving when you've just enjoyed a couple days to yourself outside of this capitalist system. And then on top of that, there's other factors living in America. Flo, tell us about your day on your street.
Yeah, I thought the most exciting thing about the day was going to be that, Twitter was being purchased by Elon Musk and that capitalism was going to capitalism. But apparently the most exciting thing that was going to happen to me today was that I was going to have a very American experience of wondering who's knocking on my door, like the goddamn police, and then finding out it's the goddamn police who are informing me that there is an active shooter situation happening on my street, and that they may or may not have heard gunshots, and that they're locking down the schools on the street, 3 to be exact, and blocking off the entire street and giving me very little information, but telling me my options are to stay put or to leave. And I'm like, okay, I don't, like, all you've told me is maybe someone shot a gun. And I'm like, there's a part of me that am not minimizing at all gun violence, but I'm also like, there are more guns here than there are people. This is America, Jack. Like, I'm supposed to shut down my whole life because somebody fired a gun? Isn't that what you wanted them to do? Don't you fight for people to have these things all the time? Isn't that what they're designed for? Like, I'm very confused about why there are 12 officers on my street because maybe you heard a gunshot. Isn't that just like the Star Spangled Banner and gunshots? Isn't that what America sounds like? Like, I'm very confused at this moment about like what's happening. So those are my confusing feelings of just like, yeah, we hear guns all the time because people have guns because we think that's okay. So now
That's incredible. So they asked you, like, do you want to stay?
Did I want to stay or leave? And I was like, I don't have enough information I found out I was 30 seconds younger when I found out that any of this was happening. And now you want me to execute and make decisions about with very little information. Like, should I be like, shouldn't you be telling me what is in my best interest right now? What am I paying you for? I was very confused because I was just like, I still feel responsible for my own safety and you don't feel like you're here to help me. And no one, that was at 11:13 a.m. At the time of this recording, it is 7:17 p.m.
We record Mondays, so it's Monday, April 25th.
And no one has knocked on my door, rang my bell, or made any attempt to contact me to tell me any updates in the last 8 hours.
So we were prepping for today's show in a group chat, and Flo sent us this KCRA article, I believe it was, saying that there's an active shooter, and it was like basically on your block. It was like a few doors down.
Yeah.
And then I was texting the group, sort of trying to set up time, trying to figure out our, arc of what we're going to discuss. And Flo was very loudly not responding to the texts. And I started getting scared. And so I clicked on that link again to that story, and they had changed the story, given the new information they'd gotten, from active shooter situation to hostage situation. That's when I got really freaked out. And you did eventually get back to us. You were working most of the day, yes. But yeah, I mean, it is a serious situation. It's still going on as we record, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have not been given any updates. There are still officers outside my window. I just leaned over to check. So to my knowledge, the street is still closed off. That my update on this was that there was a negotiator who was in communication with the person, that there may be a person inside the home who's being held, that the gun has been fired on more than one occasion, potentially at 10. And then I guess after the police showed up sometime later. But again, no updates have been given. And so, I don't know, like, I didn't feel like I was given enough information to make a decision this morning about whether or not to stay or to go. So I went to my public health training, which is that fire and water, you typically want to leave. Everything else, usually the recommendation is to shelter in place, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's a in progress situation, and your best bet is to stay where you are. So I just kind of was like, I guess I have to be my own decision maker here. And that was what I decided to do. But as the day has worn on, I have become more and more concerned about like, what does that mean and what's going on? And like, the whole street is blocked off, and like, it's very confusing. So, and I'm really feeling for, if there's a person in there who is being threatened by violence, obviously that's the person most proximate to the danger, and
right.
Who I need to be most concerned about. But it also, at times throughout the day, I thought to myself, is there something they're not telling us? Because the helicopter's been out, the SWAT team is here, there's a negotiator. Like, I was just like, this morning you were like, oh, maybe somebody fired a gun. And then I'm like, you locked down 3 schools and shut down an entire street that a bus comes down. It just made me feel like I was not being told some pertinent piece of information that I needed to decide for my own safety, and to just like figure out, how to navigate the rest of my day. And I'm just left with that lingering feeling.
Yeah. It's at this point, situations like this, I doubt they'll go knocking on the neighbors' doors a second time. And it's weird, but given your proximity, but probably the most you're going to get is from whatever the news outlets are putting out right now. Flo and I talked a few hours before recording and discussed sort of like potential ballistic forensics to make sure that she'd be safe. So Flo is safe. We can record, we believe.
Yes.
But yeah, well, it's, what do you say about something like this other than welcome to America?
Yeah, it feels like an Onion headline of like, this is one of the only places on earth where this repeatedly happens, and we all kind of just have it. This is the problem we all live with, or one of the many problems we all live with, and just the political will doesn't seem to be there to do anything about it. So, to quote one of my favorite shows from the late 90s, crime, gee, I don't know.
With that, I think we should just start this show.
Indeed. Also, we do know.
We do.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Flo.
And PJ.
I am so excited to have this group today. We do not have Skylar. We are covering local stuff today, so he will not be on. We also do not have Shannon, who is doing all of the things in her life that she has to be doing. I think all of the hosts are learning what it means to kind of enter your late 30s and be a part of a family right now.
Yes.
So hearts out to Shannon as well. She'll be back very soon, I'm sure. But I'm very eager to have this episode today. This is a topic that is very close to me after what I saw what happened to a local history teacher earlier this year. And there's something really maddening about the story that I really just learned about this morning when a fellow journalist friend sent me the link to this statement from yet another history teacher in our region who appears to be just horribly mistreated, a widely beloved teacher. So why don't we just like start up on it? Should I just like sort of lay out the storyline, lay out the facts,
Yep.
and we'll just go from there?
Yeah.
Okay. So we all have spoken about Gabriel Gaip, teacher at Inderkum High School, who was a widely beloved teacher, but he got the Project Veritas proto-fascist treatment, and the school district sided with the proto-fascists and tried to fire him. And that eventually led to death threats against Gabe. It led to people outside his house with guns. It led to some like really messed up things. And now, if you would think that our region has learned its lesson, that it's not happening. Now we're seeing the same thing over again, but with a very well-loved, very prominent Black teacher in South Natomas by the name of Jordan McGowan. Mm-hmm. Now, Jordan is a history teacher at Rio Tierra Junior High, tenured. He is the chair of the history/social science department. He has for years been the boys basketball coach at that school. He is the advisor for the Black Student Union. He lives in the neighborhood. He knows these kids. He runs into them in front of the taco truck. He goes to their birthday parties in the park. He is so widely beloved that the first month of every school year, he is voted the teacher of the month. I believe you can only win once. But that's how widely beloved he is, right? And already we're seeing correlates with what happened with Mr. Gaip, who actually was voted by the students to speak at the graduation just the year before everything went down with that horrible school district. So Jordan, Mr. McGowan, probably, I would guess, probably his lawyers were saying not to speak publicly on this, but I have deep respect for him for coming out, for writing a statement on this to the community. And he drives home really hard that I'm responsible to the community more than I'm responsible to anyone else in this situation, which I really appreciated. So sorry, I'm getting a little backgroundy here. Let me lay down the facts. Widely loved teacher. He was hired on by a Black principal and an Indian American vice principal as a push, a mandate to help diversify the staff at the schools in that region so that the staff looks more like the students and public that they're serving. Mr. McGowan is very much in tune with Black history and everything that comes with that, right? Like, and everything that comes with telling the history of Black America and why things are the way they are. And that's a thing that in a neoliberal school system can sort of rub people the wrong way. He has dealt over the last few years with some pushback, some kind of pushing of the brakes on some of the programs he's wanted to do, but he's been widely respected by other staff for his anti-racist work on his workshops with other teachers to help them create anti-racist classrooms. Not only that, he's pushed forward on a lot of initiatives to help teach Black history to students, things like that, and the school has pushed back on that even. All of this is to say he felt like something was a little off, something was happening. And then around the time of November 2021, this is around the time that Gabriel Gaip over at Inderkum was very widely publicly going through that fight with his school district. Suddenly we see this school going after Mr. McGowan. The correlates with a progressive teacher, and add into this like this fairly obvious kind of anti-Black action against him and what he represents. So as this happens, as it happened with Gabe when it was a one strike thing, same happened with Mr. McGowan. Single strike. He'd never been written up for anything. He'd never been admonished for anything on paper. Like, this is the first time that they actually came to him, and this first thing is them basically moving to fire him. So what happened is, according to him, according to a statement published on April 25th, Monday, he had a student who had skipped his class. This was in November of 2021. So the student had detention after school. But as the basketball coach, Mr. McGowan had a second day of tryouts, and then was second and last day of tryouts. And that student had asked sort of the school's kind of police officer type, who was sort of monitoring the detention, if he could instead go to the tryout. And so that person, this is off hours. Mr. McGowan's not on school hours. He's on his phone, personal phone probably, although I don't know the facts of that. And they call him up and they say, the student wants to come to tryouts. There's a little interaction. The kid kind of swears at him, and Mr. McGowan agrees to go. He's like, you know what? Why don't you come down to the tryouts? We'll play one-on-one. If you beat me, you get to be on the team. You get a starting position. No questions asked. Go, Flo.
I was going to say, so there is an important line that the teacher admits was uttered before this, which is that the school officer calls and says, this student wants to come to basketball tryouts. Is that okay? And the teacher laughed and said, how does this little Nword think he's going to come to tryouts when he didn't come to my class? And he admits that the words spoken in private, but they were overheard, was really kind of what opened the door to this. And then basically the student then said, F Mr. Mac. I don't know how many of these curse words are, because I don't want to have to bleep them all, but B-A. And then he was kind of like, I was lost. Right? I guess we're on the radio. I wasn't sure. Like, I was trying to avoid.
We got Mickey.
And so then he was like, what did he say? And then the student doubled down and said, fuck your bitch ass N-word. Right. So like, that was like the interaction. Right. And so then, and he basically said back to him, okay, since I'm all those names and you want to play so bad, let's play one-on-one for your spot on the team. If you win, you're on the team, you're a starter, and you don't need to try out. But if you lose, you leave the gym and the team. And so I just wanted to make sure, like, there was this interaction with him that kind of precipitates all of it, where he said this, like, how does he think he's going to come to tryouts when he didn't come to my class? And he used the N-word, short A, not ER.
Right. And a reminder again, Mr. McGowan is a Black man.
Correct.
And he, as he says in this piece he's written, he speaks Ebonics. Like, that's part of common parlance, right? So he also says, which I think this is a really important and very, very central to this, as a Black man who grew up in Black culture, who really can connect with his students kind of through these spaces. He writes this: in Black culture, games, specifically basketball, are often used as a method of teaching, settling conflicts, and forming bonds. A. Rafiq Muhammad, who wrote Black Men on the Blacktop, Basketball and the Politics of Race, explains, quote, the blacktop functions as a semi-public platform for exhilarative expressions of cultural relevance, Black masculinity, and ultimately personhood for people who, because of structural opposition to social and economic inclusion and a history of requisite deference to an unyielding dominant culture. He didn't finish that quote. But you get the idea. He goes on to say, Black folks have always been, this is Mr. McGowan, have always been able to go to the court to play ball and be in our own world. I have been such an effective teacher because I'm able to connect and relate to my students. I have taught dozens of students who have learned to respect me and ultimately trust me. not only as their coach or teacher, but as an adult in their life because of our time on the basketball court. This is a natural part of the way I teach. So he's saying that if I wanted to be punitive, carceral, if I was angry, I would have said, suspend him, expel him, whatever. This is him bringing him in a way that's like, that makes sense to him, right? So anyway, the student comes, go ahead, Flo.
And one more point on that. I mean, just bringing a moment of levity to this as well. I was really surprised that when he said all of that, he did not mention the fact that one of the most popular movies of the late 90s and early 2000s is a movie called Love and Basketball, in which literally the words, "I will play you for your heart," are uttered. And I don't want to do spoiler alerts in case there are listeners out there who have never seen this movie, but it is like a Black cult classic. And it is absolutely true. Like nobody, like it's funny to think about, but also it very much feels on brand with all of the things that Mr. McGowan talks about in this episode, when it's just like, yeah, this is how we're going to handle like whether or not the two of us should be together. Is like, we're going to play basketball because we both ball. That's how this works. So I just had to interject that as like, it shows up even in art and entertainment as like, the blacktop is an important part of culture.
Yeah. And I thought you were going to say white men can't jump. And I'm like, well,
I mean, also white men can't jump. Let's just talk about it, right?
Just bring them all in. Yeah.
Well, I was going to also say it's just one of those places like a barber shop where that sort of talking goes down, but it's not necessarily in other spaces because it's not necessarily acceptable in those spaces a lot of the time when white folks are around.
It's also a way to handle things that has multiple dimensions to it, right? Like, I mean, there's even the phrase that people use a lot of times when like free throws are being shot and like somebody misses the free throw and somebody says, "Ball don't lie." And it's like, well, yeah, I guess the ball is like an inanimate object and can't literally tell lies. But also there's like the justice of it, of like, I've heard this talked about a lot as well, of like part of the reason why sports especially can occupy like a really important part of culture, especially for folks who are lower income, and in this country that's tied very much into our racial caste system, is in part because the rules are written and they are understandable by everyone. And like, so there is almost this like level playing field of like, you come and you participate and everybody has the ability to be able to have the tools to do that. And that's not really the case for other systems that are set up. And so there is this affinity for like when the rules are all laid out. And that's even why there have been like pushbacks on things like the Shaq rule, right? Or like changing, some of the rules based on players learning how to game or how to, do well in the system. And then you change it so that now, there's defensive 3 seconds and there's all these things that you're doing.
Got to hop out of the
like you're doing all these things to make it so that people who have figured out how to be competitive can't be quite as competitive. And even still, they'll find more ways to be competitive. So, there is definitely a cultural element of this that can't be, can't be shortchanged in the context of this story.
Absolutely. And I don't think we'll have time to discuss fully this piece. Hopefully, Mr. McGowan someday will come on our show because I think this is an incredibly important story. I think that kind of the overt racism from the school district is a real problem. And so it's really, I really do hope that Mr. McGowan gets his day to speak about this. Especially given the historic background between him and the school, especially after a white principal came in, that's when things started. That's when the temperatures started to rise, right? But back to this moment, this day, which is what the school is pointing to, right? That's like, oh, this is where you went wrong, the single strike, and now we're going to fire you. Kid shows up to the tryouts. Everyone watches his one-on-one game. The kid decides we'll play to 3, and they play. And it's almost like it's almost like a movie scene, like the way he discusses this. The student, while on defense, refused to kind of put his hands up to defend. And so Mr. McGowan used a common street ball move that you've seen. We've all seen it, right? Like we saw it with the Harlem Globetrotters. We see it in all sorts of street ball. The off the heezy, which is when you have the ball, you're dribbling, and you bounce it off the defender's head, normally forehead, and then get the ball back, and then like either take a shot or go to the hoop, right? And it's sort of like, oh, you're not respecting me as a defender. I'm gonna return that right back to you, right? And he did that. He said to him a couple times. Never did the kid, express any pain, anything like that. Sure, there's a bruised ego involved, but like this is a classic thing that happens on a basketball court. And so the school basically at the end of all this brought him in, and this happened on Wednesday. By Friday, they'd taken his keys and escorted him off campus. One reason that they provided was his use of the Nword. He was not on the clock at the time. This was a private conversation, as he writes in his personal statement. The other thing they bring up is him, bouncing the ball off the kid's forehead. He outlines very well, and of course we'll include this link in the show notes, why this is real bullshit. But yet, as I say this, the school board will be moving forward on Tuesday, April 26th, to try and terminate him as a tenured history teacher. So what are our thoughts here?
Well, I mean, I think there's so much else happening in this story, right? In terms of like just the role that Mr. McGowan is playing in this community, trying to teach a decolonize the classroom, teaching this journalism class that even when he got the students on Good Day Sacramento, he couldn't get transportation for them to come. That wasn't lauded as a way to be able to highlight the student success. When George Floyd, was murdered and Breonna Taylor's, killers were not prosecuted, that there was no attention to what kind of space should be provided in the school for students to be able to react to what they're experiencing. And so, as I was reading, I mean, part of what about Mr. McGowan's story felt so similar is that, I've never worked in a school formally. I've volunteered in a lot of them, but I did work for a state agency. And I had a very, similar experience of having presentations talking about, structural racism, and talking about, basically the disparities in maternal and infant outcomes for, in particular, Black women. And I had a presentation. It was actually one of the reasons why I left the Department of Public Health, that was canceled very unceremoniously a week before it was to be given as an internal presentation to the rest of my department because, quote, the election just happened and race is a very sensitive subject. And this was when Donald Trump was elected. And wow. I was like, and I actually responded back and said, nothing about birth outcomes or maternal outcomes in this country has changed in 150 years, and that's part of the problem. Racism was not invented the day that Donald Trump was elected president, and nor have the trends in, Black babies being 2.5 times more likely to die before their first birthday. That hasn't changed since the 1800s. So there's nothing about this presentation that needs to change, but that was their pushback was, well, race is a sensitive topic. We think this needs to go to the director's office. And what about the presentation might need to change? This presentation I had just given to the American Public Health Association like 2 weeks earlier needed to change because Donald Trump was the president-elect. It was shocking. Like, this is a place that has, and, is supposed to be dedicated to anti-racism. So as I was reading, I was just like, wow, this is the exact same playbook that is employed. And I think it's even most disappointing when it happens in a place like California that touts itself and pats itself on the back for being so progressive and for being, so ahead of the game when it comes to, racial equity issues. And it's like, yeah, but you silence people when they're trying to tell you real truths.
This is liberalism, right? In he's in liberal spaces. This was a liberal space you were in, and like there's nothing progressive, there's nothing revolutionary, there's certainly nothing that will help foster and move the race conversation forward. And it's maddening to watch, but like it is, California is full mask off. It shows you just how you will treat especially Black and brown folks when they push back and make white people in power uncomfortable.
I think that was evidence. I think that was evidence in one of the things that he was talking about, where he mentioned that one of the teachers made some racist comments and told a few bold-faced lies, and he got up and he left. And then the principal came in there and was like, "We're going to do some reparative work, blah, blah, blah." A couple weeks later, okay, so we're all good, right? Nothing done. And it's like they know the right words to say to make sure they're checked off that progressive list or whatever, but they're not actually following through on any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, they're trying to, as they did with Gabe, right? Like they're trying to have Mr. McGowan take down a Malcolm X poster. It's like, are you fucking kidding me?
Or the fact that the principal came in there with his social media and reported to HR, like that would be anything that would ever be an issue, as clear when the HR came back and was like, that's his personal stuff. As long as it's not linked to the school, it's fine. But the principal clearly didn't have his back, because he was instantly going to HR about it when he should have known better if he was actually competent.
Which is also to mention that Mr. McGowan is an incredible community organizer. I believe he's one of the founders of Neighbor Program. I apologize if that's not correct, but I believe that's the case. And he's been doing this stuff for a long time, and it's really important stuff. But then you have these, by the way, this shit is like classic COINTELPRO stuff. Like they've done this since the late 60s, especially against Black radicals. They, you know, some concerned parent, quote unquote, who like, you never hear who it is. You never hear if it's actually a parent, right? This could just be a fucking fed in fucking Langley, just typing out an email, was like, I don't know. There's this, you know, there's this Black communist teacher of yours who like runs this program and blah, blah, blah. And they try and use that to defame him, to get him to lose his job. And, you know, it's sad to say, but it's like these rat fuckers are succeeding because neoliberals will bow to that and to them, because they don't like to be made to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to be a part of these really deeper conversations about what our racial dynamic has really, you know, a festering racial dynamic has really left us to, and who's to blame for that.
Yeah. And it's the second time, honestly, in 2 days that I've been reminded of the Martin Luther King quote about liberals and the fact that they don't like that. They'd rather have an unjust peace than a just, you know, messy situation, basically.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, everything about this just reeks of this place wanting to not do the deep work that's required to address racism. Like, it's deep and uncomfortable work. And it has to be uncomfortable for all of us, because I think the thing that sometimes gets lost in all of this is that we've all been socialized into the same norms. And so when people are speaking out and saying things that are hard to say or calling people out, we were all raised not to do that. That same like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, we don't confront things. These are the things we die with, and we maybe whisper to our friends about it, but we never say anything publicly, and we take a stiff upper lip. We've all been socialized into that. The difference is that when people are deciding to speak out about it, they are actively going against everything in their body that tells them, protect yourself, shut up, and just go along to get along. And they're saying to themselves, but I believe this and I cannot sit by and let this happen. And so if we acknowledge that, if we can recognize that the truth tellers, the people who are taking risks, are going against everything in their being, we have to recognize that it's hard for them too.
Everything in their best interest too.
Yes, and everything in their best interest, because you risk losing it all when you stand up and say, this isn't right, I don't like it, and this is not okay. And, you know, a lot of people will support you publicly, but so many more people won't. They will say to you behind closed doors, wow, you were so brave, I really support what you've said. But they won't actually like stand with you and say it too. And so, and because people are scared, and that's what we've all been socialized into, is that there's a real risk to this, and they're accurately understanding the risk and deciding where they fall on that. And so I think the charge is for us all to get very comfortable being uncomfortable, to get comfortable having to learn things, to recognize that, you know, it's gonna, like, if we're really interested in racial equity, if we're really interested in pushing conversations forward, it's not going to be easy for any of us. We're going to be called out because we all are complicit in this system in some way, or we've all been indoctrinated into it, and that we have some, the learning is the unlearning as well. And I think far too often people are trying to use this very like white supremacist approach to things, which is, I just want to be perfect. Right? Like, it's a very white supremacist, a very capitalistic notion of like, I'm aiming for perfection. And so if you tell me I'm not perfect, you're the problem, not the fact that the standard was flawed to begin with, and that I was never going to be perfect. There's something that robs us of our humanity to just not be able to be wrong sometimes, but it's ingrained in all of us. The perfect attendance awards and the 4.0s and the you have to do it right, teaches us that mistakes are a liability, not just a part of our human experience. And so we are unpracticed and unskilled at being wrong and making mistakes and being called out. And so when somebody violates that like social contract of we don't call each other out and we pretend everybody is perfect, then they're the problem, as opposed to being the person who will help us to get more in touch with our humanity.
Which is what causes a lot of our issues. I mean, it's the same thing with like, you know, sexual assault survivors or, you know, molestation. It's all that need to maintain the appearance of perfection that ends up putting so many people in the position of suffering unnecessarily.
Absolutely. It's all tied in together.
You know, I guess dovetailing with all of this, the name of the game here for Mr. McGowan is solidarity, and it's the same game we've been trying to really hone since the 60s, right? I've been reading a lot about this stuff, like where you know, a central piece that the FBI was trying to do against the greater capital L left was to form divisions among the greater left, when what all they were trying to do was form solidarity. And who do they focus on? Who do they attack the most? The Black folks, right? And the indigenous folks. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, really important that folks come together on this and defend Mr. McGowan at all costs. Because I mean, the name of the game on their side is to try and divide and conquer the rest of us. So if you are from an anti-racist organization, please share with your fellow folks. Any organization you're a part of, if you are DSA, NorCal Resist, if you are Sunrise Movement, like, you know, Brown Berets, like anything, let's come together on this and let's put up a real fight and make that school district regret that they ever fucking tried something like this. So the requests that Mr. McGowan put out on Twitter are, one, to sign a petition. He does have a petition in support of him. We can provide that link in the show notes as well. Number 2 is to attend the board meeting. This is April 26th at 6 p.m. It's at 5115 Dudley Boulevard, McClellan, California. So I don't know precisely where that is, and I don't know if there's options for Zoom, but I would assume there are. I'm sure you can give a public comment in other ways as well, but it's, if you are listening on Tuesday, you have time to do this. Number 3, send an email. There are emails you can send to the Twin Rivers School District. Just fill their inboxes in support of Mr. Mack. Add your personalized note and a subject line for a stronger impact. It will just take you 30 seconds. And finally, make a phone call. Reach out to Twin Rivers Unified School District and let them know that what they're doing is not okay. That I mean, in my opinion, it's blatantly racist. That number is 916-566-1600. It doesn't take long to do any of these things. Beyond that, any last thoughts on this topic?
I think these two situations really scare me because, right, wrong, or maybe indifferent, I have always viewed institutions of learning as places where we should be more advanced in our practice of our values, and where people come to learn and to continue to grow. And so I think it's especially disappointing when these types of things, I recognize schools or institutions, I recognize that they have perpetuated tons of harm, but it also is really challenging to me when I see so many of the institutional ills that everybody has a talking point and a prepared template about their values around happening in real time. And there's like a cognitive disconnect between what we say we stand for and our ability to handle these issues, right? And so I'm seeing very much, even we didn't talk about it at all, but like the officer who was involved in an in-school suspension, detention, whatever we're going to call it, in a place where we know, because we've read tons of articles about it, it's been reported on, that Black and brown students, Black students in particular in the Sacramento County, are suspended and expelled at the highest rates, right? Which is all part of the school to prison pipeline. And so I'm just seeing all these institutions kind of coming together, and this like ignoring of Black pain, an anti-Black culture that's not being addressed. A teacher who I feel like, based on his account, where he has admitted his own, things that you could point to and say, oh gosh, this is, you shouldn't have said that, or, I can understand why somebody would see this differently. And so I feel that I'm getting a very, I don't want to call it balanced, but I feel like a very forthright account of what happened, because it doesn't paint him just as like, here I am in this like perfect role. It's like, here's what I said, and here's what I did, and here's how I approached this, and this is how it was handled. And to be met with, just this like active resistance, I think it's even more disappointing, because I feel like these are the people who should be best equipped to handle these things. Again, maybe I'm wrong about that feeling or that expectation. And so when they can't do it, I'm just like, God save the rest of us. Like, you can't get it right in an educational institution that is designed, or that's supposed to be designed to be thinking and reflecting on these things, and to have people who are reading and understanding that every day should be a learning opportunity. Like, how am I expected to get it right in any of the other institutions that are plagued by the very same issues? So I think that's just the deep sadness that, these stories constantly bring up for me.
Yeah. And this is why we fight. It's hard because it sometimes feels like we're not winning. But I have a feeling that Mr. McGowan will have his day here. And I hope to someday be able to report on that, as well as, the outcomes for Mr. Gaip as well. This is not over. It's not okay what these districts are doing. And, we just keep fighting. We do not have much time left in this episode. Can we move on to, we hope to have Mr. McGowan on in the very near future. Obviously this close to the school board meeting. I think it's probably, in his best interest not to be hopping onto a podcast or something right now, but hopefully we have him on to really give us the full story sometime soon. Moving on to the next thing real quick. I wanted to discuss a little thing that happened on the American River Parkway over the weekend. We do know that there is a bill in the Assembly of California being introduced. That's AB 2633. It's related to unhoused people camping in certain park areas, most notably here locally around the American River Parkway. So over the weekend, Kevin McCarty, who's a Democrat, again, one of these libs, right, who were like, oh, shouldn't they be progressive? McCarty's worked with a lot of like real progressive people in the past, and yet he's coming out saying that, enough is enough. We need to push these people out of the American River Parkway. He's there alongside council member / District 4 constituent Jeff Harris, and they're both there, trying to rally their troops with their anti-homeless rhetoric. Paul, you were there for a lot of this. I actually ran into you. My partner and I ran into you and a group of folks on, I believe it was Friday night.
Or not night, but yeah, Friday. A bunch of us went out there to chalk up basically a bunch of, it's just stuff saying AB 2633 is going to kill people. AB 20 sweeps are, sweeps kill people, unhoused people, or
So this was the night before McCarty and Harris were set to go down with all of these knee-jerk reactionaries and sort of march along the parkway and make their little political statement about homeless folks, right?
Right. And we actually had security called on us, and security showed up, and they were just like, oh, this is all chalk. Oh, okay, that's fine. And then they just took off. But then one of the people who apparently takes care of the area, I can't remember his name, was really concerned because he was like, well, I'm going to clean. I believe in free speech, but I don't have to clean all this later. And it's just like, oh, okay, well. How about,
he was with like the Friends. He was the head of like the Friends of Sutter's Landing or something
like that.
Wildly condescending to you all.
Oh yeah.
Saying like, there is another side to this, and like, it's the classic the American River Parkway is Sacramento's gem rhetoric, right. Which it's like we don't fucking know. Like the people he's talking to don't know that, but there's the central thing that they are unable to answer. These rich old white men, where will these people go when you remove them?
Well, can I just say that McCarty and a number of other folks, their pushback was anywhere but the parkway. That was their whole thing. It was no solutions offered. It was no housing first to make sure that we actually have some place to send people. It was acting like the existing shelter was enough, or that the safe parking and the new buildings going up were going to be enough to house the 2,000 people out there, which actually Sierra Club got wrong because they said 750. But the Rangers actually stated in an earlier article this year, 2,000, estimated to 2,000. So there's no place to go.
So yeah, let's touch on this a little bit. The Sierra, was it the club foundation?
Sierra Club.
Sierra Club.
They wrote a little report, and this report's claiming like, oh, you have to remove all the unhoused people from the American River Parkway this year.
It's a lot of correlation. This happened here, so that's probably because this. And it's just like, no, we need data.
It makes me so angry.
Yeah. hold on. Let me lay out the
causation.
facts. Hold on.
Okay.
Whoa. Let me lay out the facts first, and then we can get into this. So they are claiming that there's been a drastic rise in fires along the American River Parkway,
North side of the American River Parkway.
the north side of it. And so they're claiming that it is due to a rise in unhoused people living along that area
and lack of enforcement.
They all must be removed.
Yeah.
And lack of enforcement is part of that flow.
That is issue number one, right? Because, okay, so first of all, a key epidemiologic principle that we are taught at the very beginning of our training is that association does not equal causation. And that means that just because two things happen to occur does not mean one caused the other. And you need more of what we call the postulates of causality to be able to determine if A, then B, because A caused B, right? So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here, but even if for a moment that I can contend that fires have been caused by people living along the parkway, I think the answer that has been devised by the Sierra Club is wrong-headed in its approach, because it is essentially saying we need to move people from where they are without taking any accountability for the fact that there also have been measures that have been called on, like safe ways for people to cook and keep themselves warm, that have not been employed yet. And step one should not be displace people in a very violent and dehumanizing way. Step one should be, what can we do to do harm reduction and make this something safe for the 2,000 people who are currently occupying this space because they have been displaced from other places in a violent manner.
And that's all that advocates have been saying for the longest time. And if you talk, I'm in a chat with Crystal Sanchez, and she constantly talks about the fact that
Sacramento Tenants Union,
Sacramento Homeless Union.
Sacramento Homeless Union, and she is just like an absolute force.
Oh, and she knows, she has all the information on this. She has the receipts a lot of the times, because it's literally like, we'll be like, well, they need trash. They need trash pickup. And the East Sac folks will be like, well, they have trash pickup. And I'm like, not at every location. And it's very inconsistent. It's not always installed in all the places. Sometimes county pulls funding. Sometimes, bathrooms will be there one week and not there the next week because they just pulled it. And it's just like, yeah, there's very inconsistent. And you need to understand this inconsistency doesn't ensure that it's actually going to be utilized. And if you wanted to not have the impact on the surrounding neighborhoods on you need to make sure it's actually going to be utilized and going to be there consistently. Things like the Bob Erlenbush pointing out the fact that they're from, did you want to say?
Yes, Bob Erlenbush of Sacramento Region Coalition to End Homelessness.
Yes.
But he was pointing out that we've been some DSA folks have tried to drop off fire extinguishers to the island, to the old folks there, to make sure that they're not going to have any issues, but they haven't done that in other places. They haven't made sure that there are fire pits for folks to cook at. And we have to keep pointing out to the house folks, they're human. They need to cook food occasionally. So that's going to happen when they don't
use the restroom and make trash. And
right?
I see some of your trash cans in those of you who are housed, and you're making a lot of trash every week. Imagine what it's like for other people as well. Like,
for 1 month, dump it all out in your backyard and see how quickly it piles up instead of having the trash pick it up.
This is part of me that it's really frustrating, because when we start talking about, sanitation, it's like, I am a human. Multiple times a day, I am going to need to use the restroom. I know that's not the sexy thing that women are supposed to talk about, but I need to poop and pee multiple times a day. And if you don't find me a place to do that safely, if you don't find me a place to put my trash, it has to go somewhere. I have two hands, and sometimes they're occupied doing other things other than holding my trash. So you're going to have to find a way to be able to deal with the fact that I'm a human being, I exist, and this is what happens. And if you lock bathrooms and don't find places, then you're going to find my excrement wherever I'm able to deposit it. And that's on you at that point, because you failed to prepare and plan for a human inevitability of the fact that I need to do this multiple times a day.
Can I share with you my favorite thing about this story? This report by the Sierra Club was written by a man named Brannon.
Uh-oh.
Do we know who Brad is?
I do not, but I'm scared.
Right.
Brannon has been on Sacramento Twitter for a long time. He is formerly the data guy for the Sacramento Bee. He has a long history of early Marcos type anti-homelessness. And just in the last year or so, our Brad baby is trying to be like, oh no, we love the homeless. We just, want to like help them and like blah, blah, blah. And so he like sugarcoats these like horrific anti-homeless things. Brad himself, as the data guy formerly of the Bee, does not understand this epidemiological central tenet of correlation does not equal causation. B, for a numbers guy, I love this with these aging white men. Like, they're all like, oh, the numbers and like, does the bottom line add up and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you give them the simple math of shelter bed / housing as it compares to people who are unhoused. And like, they go into a fucking fugue state. Like, they can't even begin to try and like do that simple math. So this is who wrote. Brad is apparently, since he's left the Bee, he is now on the Sierra Club Executive Committee, and he is the author himself of their report, which they sent to the brand new, very green county reporter at the Bee. Now, nothing against, honestly, like, I think the young folks at the Bee have been doing phenomenal work. I think when you're new to a beat, like, man, when I was new to beats, like, I got bamboozled by some real assholes. That just happens sometimes. Brad is not a good guy. As evidenced by this. And that was just really funny to me that he was the author of this thing. My other favorite thing at the end of this story, because of course he gets the last quote. He says, this is Brannon. And we had some very in-depth discussions because it's a sensitive issue, Brannon said, because, we're all Democrats and we don't want to harm the homeless more than they've already been harmed. But we're also gravely concerned about what is happening in the Parkway. I love it. So like, this is again what a neoliberal approach to something like this is. Get them out. I don't care.
So you stopped short of like finishing out the article, which I thought was actually the most damning part of this.
I didn't know if you wanted me to read that. Go ahead.
Yeah, like, so the fact that 1/4 of the Parkway has burned is a pretty big deal. He added, the status quo, the group decided, is bad for both the homeless and the environment. Yeah, the problem is you decided on a solution that may benefit the environment to the clear detriment of people experiencing homelessness. That is the problem. We all agree that the status quo is not good. We do not want there to be out of control fires. We also do not want people experiencing homelessness to be unsheltered and have to fight in the elements when we have failed to provide adequate housing. So I do not want to have the conversation about people who are choosing to be outside, because there are a myriad of factors that contribute to that, not the least of which is that you don't have anywhere for them to go. And there's a lot of like very harmful things that happen when people's first choice is take this or go to jail. So like, let's not even get into that. But you're absolutely right. Nobody wants there to be out of control fires, but there are lots of solutions, not the most complicated of which isn't even the one that's like the most like the most likely. It's actually the easiest thing, which would be to find safe places for people to keep themselves warm and to cook food. And so if your solution doesn't involve that, if it doesn't involve something that's not going to be bad for people experiencing homelessness in favor of the environment, then you're missing the mark as well.
Yeah. I mean, the silly thing to me is like, these people are respected because it's like, well, I wear a button down shirt and I have salt and pepper hair, and I must be more, I must have the moral high ground on this. And it's like, you old shits don't care what happens outside of your backyard. And it's evidenced over and over again. But it is also proven over and over again, not by every media outlet, but by more and more folks, that it is the true experts. It is the Shannons of our community that do have the answers, that work in front of this stuff every day, and they do know what people's needs are. And it's up to, leadership in the city and the county to listen to them. Or do you want the fucking Metro Chamber and Region Business, knocking down your door with their punitive carceral solutions? Like that, it is that simple. It truly is that simple. The answer: social housing, a lot of social housing. We need to decommodify housing, which should be a right. But the real estate folks that pay for our politicians' campaigns will not allow that. That is not how this works here in our city or in any city in this country, which is why we are where we are.
Well, the truth is, for decades, we've defunded social housing so that it ended up crumbling around us because of the fact that at the time, a lot of it was switched over from white folks primarily in there to black folks primarily in there. And next thing you know, it's crumbling apart. And then everyone goes, look, the government can't do housing. Let's depend on developers. And it's like, no, there's a reason we defunded social housing. We didn't take care of it. We let it fall apart because sometimes it was on very profitable land and developers wanted to be able to take it back. So there's a lot of reasons behind why lots of folks have these bad impressions of social housing. And I think it could be a really great answer.
And also, I think it's important for us to take responsibility for the fact that like a lot of people, because they have bought into a capitalist system, then are invested in, whether it's their literal investment of, my house is the most expensive thing I ever bought, and so therefore I want it to appreciate in value because I want to make money off of it, even though I say out loud it's a human right, but I don't really believe that. Or the other side of it being the aspirational, right? Like homeowners of like, I don't want this to become a thing that we're actually protecting as a human right before I get an opportunity to make money off of it. But either way, like, it feels a lot to me like, when we start talking about anti-capitalism in a myriad of ways, people get up in arms and they say, well, I believe in capitalism, but I want, and then they start describing all these things that are not capitalistic. And I'm like, do you even know what capitalism is? Or did you read Animal Farm when you were in 7th grade and you decided that socialism was the enemy because that was the propaganda that was given to you? I'm not exactly sure, because you just described several things that are not. And honestly, the more forthright people have said, you know what, you're right. I probably need to look into this a little bit more. I don't know. And I'm like, profit can exist in ways. And like, there are all these other things that can exist. It's a matter of also thinking about what is in the public interest first, and thinking about that before we prioritize profit. And I think that's something that like a lot of people are just not familiar with as a concept. And so we have a lot of people who are being harmed by this system who also are deeply supportive of it.
I
think that's the same thing with racism as well.
100%. And that ties directly to our first segment of today's show, right? That the reason these well-meaning people don't know this stuff is because they're not allowed to be taught it. We still have red baiting, and I don't even know how you put like black baiting in our school systems, right? Where Mr. Gaip, the most popular, the most like one of the most well-versed and well-read teachers in history in his school district, gets flushed out because the neo-libs bow to the proto-fascists, right? Mr. McGowan, who teaches the real history of the real like dialectical materialism of how the Black community got to where they are in the United States. That's too much. That's too much for this neoliberal system. And so they flush him out too. We can actually have these conversations if we actually celebrate teachers like them. But until then, we have to do this education over and over again because people are ignorant of this very real thing that you know we should all know about. Should we call it? We got to call it.
I guess we got to call it.
Is there any like last thing? Anyone on sad?
Kevin McCarty sucks.
I know some progs listening are going to be pissed by that too, but it's like, this guy, this is not a good bill, man. You cannot support this.
Yeah. I mean, I think we need to look at the issues and we need to be thoughtful about all of them. And we also need to be able to admit when we got something wrong or when we got caught up in our own socialization and that we need to rethink things. And I think that's my big takeaway message is like, it's a responsibility of all of us. It is deeply difficult when you are a person in leadership or with heavy responsibility. It's hard to do. And I'll be the first to say that. It's also our responsibility. And so I think we can't just defer to what sounds easy or what, you know, we have to do. We have to lean on our values and what's right. And so if those are your values, then you have to start to question and you can't just roll over and play dead. And so I'm hoping that all of us are, you know, fortified to be able to fight that fight within ourselves, probably primarily, but also externally as well.
I love that. Okay, well,
that was my complicated way of saying do better.
Do better. But all of us do better.
All
right?
of us.
Like that's I think I really
also look in the mirror, do better. Yeah. Right? Yep. Like do better.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's call the show. Listen, we love the work we do. If you love the work we do, please become a patron. Patreon.com/voicesrivercity. We're gonna have a patron-only meetup. Other co-hosts might not know about that, but I'm saying it now. We're gonna do that. Hopefully it's in Shannon's backyard. She doesn't know yet either. Hopefully she's cool with that. But I'd really like to do that. So if you'd like to come to that, if you'd like the invite, become a patron today. We're on all the socials, Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter @Voices River City. Same for Instagram. The Instagram is very funny when we can figure out how to put the videos up. Then I guess we have a store, voicesrivercity.com/shop. Mugs, t-shirts, koozies for White Claw. What else could you want? Stickers. I'm sure we'll have more things in the future. But beyond that, I am on Twitter @YouKnowKempa, YOUKNOWKEMPA.
And I am @FloJaune, FLOJAUNE.
And I am @AOL Bites.
That always makes me smile. And you can find Skylar @Guillotine for You. That's Guillotine, the number 4, YOU. And Shannon @ShanND Stevens. Oh, were you gonna do that one?
You're just taking all of them, but okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. We've talked too much this episode. Anyway, folks, we will talk to you next week. Please do go out and support Mr. McGowan any way you can. Thank you for listening and have a lovely week.